Sometimes in life, our apparent defeats end up being great victories. Indeed, losing can be winning. Jesus illustrated this truth through his life, through his words. In particular, in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 16, are various events in the life of Jesus that seem to point to the truth, indeed, that losing is winning. The chapter, Matthew 16, begins with another competition, game, between the Pharisees and Sadducees with Jesus. And as always, even though it may appear otherwise, Jesus is the winner. The chapter begins, Matthew 16, with the Pharisees and Sadducees coming to test Jesus. They asked him for a sign from heaven. Jesus' response, verse 4, an evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and a sign will not be given it except the sign of Jonah. And he left them and went away. Left them probably scratching their heads, wondering what he meant. And even as we read those words, we might wonder what he meant if it were not that we continue reading to the very end of the chapter, which we'll arrive at here in a moment. But in between are some interludes with Jesus and his disciples, some very invaluable teaching moments with them. When he fed the multitudes in previous chapters, feeding the 5,000 men plus women and children, feeding the 4,000 men plus women and children, Jesus was teaching the disciples about faith. Here in verse 5 of Matthew 16, the disciples came to the other side of the sea, but they had forgotten to bring any bread. Jesus said to them, "Watch out and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." Now this puzzled the disciples when Jesus made this comment, because they thought, Jesus is ready to get on our case again about the fact that we forgot to bring any bread to feed us on this time, even though maybe they thought maybe they were growing too comfortable after seeing Jesus feed all those multitudes. But Jesus pointed out, and they just didn't get the point. Verse 8. But Jesus, aware of this, aware that they thought he talked about bewaring of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees when they thought he was talking about bread. Jesus said, "Do you not yet understand or remember?" Excuse me, let me back at verse 8, verse 9 there. But Jesus, aware of this, said, "You men of little faith, why do you discuss among yourselves that you have no bread?" Right now, verse 9, "Do you not yet understand or remember the 5 loaves of 5,000? How many baskets full you picked up? Or the 7 loaves of 4,000? How many baskets full you picked up? How is it that you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread? But," here he says, simply get this point, "beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." Then they understood, verse 12. They did not say to beware of the leaven of bread, but the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The disciples continue on down the road with Jesus. And Matthew records still in Matthew 16, they come to the district of Caesarea Philippi. Verse 13, he was asking of his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets." But he said to them, Jesus, who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter speaking for all the disciples, and Simon Peter being the spokesman and also the one who often put his mouth in motion before his mind was in gear, so it seems. Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said to him, "Blessed are you, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I say to you, Peter, that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatsoever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven." Then he warned the disciples. He'd already told them to beware of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now he warns the disciples that they should tell no one that he was the Christ. And then Matthew starts making the point of transition here in verse 21. He says, "From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised up on the third day." Disciples did not get the point that Jesus was trying to make about suffering and dying and being raised up. Verse 24, "Then Jesus said to his disciples," and here's where we're getting to this idea of that losing is winning. "Then Jesus said to his disciples," verse 24, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." Let me read that again, verse 25. "For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." Verse 26. "For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul?" Jesus makes the point. To go up, you have to go down. Jesus showed it through his life. Before he returned to heaven, he had to die and descend into the earth. And even in Jesus' case, go into the hell itself and preach the gospel. He's saying, as he says in other places in his gospel, for a seed to grow, to bear fruit, first of all, it has to be buried in the ground. It has to die. And from that burial comes life. In our life, there are times when it seems like we are buried alive. Those are opportunities to die to self, to die to ambition, to die to pride, to die to selfishness, and allow Christ to so control our lives that we live for him and unto him, and let his life be expressed through us as he lives in us and through us. Losing is winning.